I quite like the purple. This is the Trek Madone SLR 9 Gen 8, and it's much less of a mad one than the previous iterations of the Trek Madone. My thoughts, my opinions, my feelings about this bike after riding just over 1,200 kilometers on it in the last 2 and a bit weeks. I've put a lot of consideration into this, so hopefully you find it informative, beneficial if you're looking to buy one, and if nothing else, just interesting. I'm going to start in the order that I notice things about this bike, and the first thing that you notice when you ride it is that it's so stable. I don't think I've ever had a race bike that just felt this planted and just happy to go in a straight line. And you might think that that leads to really boring handling and it's not exciting to ride. It's so confidence inspiring, almost unlike any other bike I've ever had. It's not nervous at all. It's got this really controlled, intuitive feeling, especially when you go into the descent and you're trying to change your line because there are potholes and imperfections on the road. It really just tracks so beautifully. It's very balanced. And I think that's one of the most important things to consider about this bike. Super planted, wants to go in a straight line. And when I'm talking about that, it's been quite stormy here in January in the UK, in the southwest, in Cornwall. We've had a lot of wind. And it is the most stable bike I've ridden in the wind. You would think with the slightly more old school V profiles of these rims that it might not be. Like U-shaped rims are considered to be a little bit better in crosswinds and things like that, but actually these, for whatever reason, it just works really, really well, whether that's the design of the frame or the wheels or just a combination of everything. It's really planted even in the wind, and that makes it a very enjoyable bike to ride. Which leads me on to the next point, and it took a while to come to this. I would describe this as the most rideable race bike I've ever ridden, and that's because it's just so confidence inspiring to ride in all conditions. It doesn't matter if it's windy, if the roads are rough, it's really smooth, it's really comfortable, and it makes it really enjoyable. It just means you can get on it and ride it anywhere and everywhere. Even, well, it's a bit of a crime, you can see it's quite dirty right now. Hopefully the cleaner clips that I have over the top of this video show just how beautiful the paintwork is. But the fact that you can take it out and ride it in any conditions, whether you should or shouldn't, is really nice. They call the colourway Era White, and I think it's quite a unique colour. I really like it, almost like a gold flake speckled throughout a white, just off-white paint job. Looks amazing in the sunshine. As you may be able to see with a little sticker down on the chainstay, this bike is provided by Amped Cycles at Indian Queens. If you're in Cornwall or you're passing through the area, go and visit and check out all the bikes that they have available. Thank you to Amped for bringing this bike to me for the next 12 months. It's been a real pleasure to get on it in the first couple of weeks, and I hope to continue that throughout 2025 and ride a lot more than I did last year. The position almost looks aggressive, but I guarantee it's nowhere near as slammed or as long as the bike looks. So this is a size medium. I'm around 1.79 m, and I have a 130 stem on there with 370mm bars in the hoods, and they flare out to 400mm in the drops. I'm really happy with that size bar and stem. I think having that slightly longer stem actually leads to the handling characteristics that I described earlier in the video. It makes it really just neutral handling. I think when you have a shorter stem, the bikes can start to feel a little bit twitchy, and if you were to go longer than 130, things can start to feel a little bit slower. Around 120 to 130 for me personally is the sweet spot of the characteristics that I enjoy. So this is a size medium. I've spent the last couple of years on a size large bike, so it's nice to finally be back on a bike that really truly fits me. But it isn't as slammed and as low as I'd feared. I think I was concerned that the head tube was going to feel shorter than it really does, but actually by the time you've got that stack height underneath the stem and the bottom of the stem, which takes all of the internal hosing for the brakes, it raises it up ever so slightly and actually gives this nice neutral position. So I mentioned those handling characteristics earlier in the video. At some point over the last couple of months, you may have seen a photograph of Quinn Simmons from the little Trek factory racing team riding a descent. I'm sure there's a camber on the road that makes the corner look slightly more exaggerated, the lean angle, than it really is. But riding this bike, the handling of it, the feeling of it, it gives you the confidence that you could get around a corner in that sort of fashion if you really wanted to. So the bike, as you see it, is exactly as it came stock out of the shop. It's spec'd with Dura-Ace and 170mm cranks with a 3652 chainset. It's got the 1130 cassette at the back. Weirdly, it's got 160 rotors front and rear, so I think if you were to make one change, you'd probably reduce the rear down to a 140. If you were to get really fussy and try and save weight, I think there are other areas you could save weight as well. I do like the wheel set, but it is my only real question mark about the bike. What I'd like to do is try another set of wheels in this bike, another set of tyres as well. The tyres actually give a really good feel on the roads, especially on the slightly wet roads that we've had recently. They seem to be resilient. I've ridden it across all sorts of different gravel lanes, little back lanes, little farm tracks and things like that, and I've had no issues. Curse myself for saying that. I don't know how much sealant is in these tyres, so maybe that leads to the feeling of, could these wheels be a little bit lighter? Until I take the tyres off and then investigate how much sealant is in there, I'm not going to know if I would be able to improve that somewhere. It's around 60 psi that I run in these tyres. Generally I pump them up at the start of the week, and in a few days time I add a little bit of air back to them, but around 60 psi, 55 in the front, maybe 60 in the rear, just enough that the tyres are pretty hard and supportive, but also there's a little bit of compliance in there. I think it's important to have that softness to a tyre these days, especially as the volume increases. These are a more confident feeling ride, but also more comfortable. And that does lead me to another one of the considerations about this bike. The total weight comes in at around 7.6 kilos. That is with pedals, with empty bottles in the bottle cages. I think there's probably a lot of paint on this bike. It's a really beautiful paint job, and I think until you see it in the flesh, it actually doesn't do it justice. I think it's a good quality paint as well. I've certainly not noticed any chips. I have washed it, ridden it, used it properly as a bike should be used. So I think if you were to go for a black one, you could save a tiny bit of weight. I also think there are little things on this bike which could help you lose weight. I mentioned the wheels a second ago, the tyres, things like that. I think if you were to play around with things a little bit, you might notice that you can quite quickly lose a tiny bit of weight from the total bike weight and turn it into a really lightweight racing machine. That's not to say it's heavy. Like, I've even got thick bar tape on here, for example. I really enjoy this new style of saddle, the short nose saddle. Nice, short, wide, flat platform across the top with the cutout groove on the inside. I think they're all much for much. There's not a huge difference to choose between all of them. I personally tend to sit right on the nose of the saddle, and actually the nose of this saddle is particularly hard, so therefore I would choose to angle it down a little bit. I mentioned before I'm 179, this is a size medium. My saddle height on 170mm cranks is set to 747mm. Ever so slightly on the high side at the moment. I may well put that down. I've been playing around with it a little bit, and the fore and aft as well. So to accommodate that saddle height, we've had to go for a slightly longer seat post than comes as standard. I think this one comes with a short seat post as standard, and this has got the longer version. I think there are two different lengths that Trek do. When we're talking about ride characteristics, I think it's important to mention that it does feel like an aero bike, in the way that we all look at our speedo when we're riding, and you always know exactly what intensity you're having to do to go at that speed, and there's just has that little bit extra pace. So you're doing 32 kilometers an hour normally, you know exactly how hard you're having to try to do that, and it just gives you that little bit extra. And as you're accelerating into a descent, you do just have that little bit more. You notice that speed curve is slightly distorted compared to what your mind's telling you that it should be doing. When you're up to speed, when you're riding, when you're doing the sort of rides that you would normally be doing on a bike that's designed like this for racing, there's absolutely nothing, it's giving nothing away to anyone. My overall summary of this bike is that I genuinely love it. I really enjoy riding it. It's a great position for me personally. It's set up really nicely, really nice and low on the front, perfect length. The handling is really enjoyable. It really instills confidence in the rider, makes you just want to ride your bike and enjoy it. The stability, I really love the stability of the bike. It just makes it really relaxing to ride. The comfort coming through the saddle is also really nice. There's a tiny bit of flex in that seat tube design, which just takes some of the road buzz out. I think this is helped with the 28mm tyres, although you could put 30s on there and you could add to that comfort even more. It's not all positive though, and there are a few things that I would change. I mentioned a minute ago about the brake rotor, probably put a lighter, smaller one on the rear if I was going to be racing on it. I'm not a huge fan of the square aero bottles. The first time you take them out and put them back in the cage, it's a bit of a faff, but you do quickly learn that. But the real reason is they vibrate. It doesn't take a particularly rough road for that to start happening. I do tend to ride with headphones, so I hadn't noticed it until I rode with Lewis a few weeks ago, and then all of a sudden you can just hear this buzz over rougher road surfaces. So I think long term I'd probably switch to round bottles. I'm sure there's an aerodynamic penalty to switching back to round bottles, but ultimately, if you were to be racing, you'd be taking bottles from anyone and everyone at different times, and the ability to have round bottles is going to be much more important than having these aero square bottles anyway. I think it's a bit of a gimmick, and I'm sure that bikes could be designed, like every other manufacturer, just to have round bottles. And then finally, I do want to change the wheels and tyres just to see how that affects the bike. I think until you've tried all sorts of combinations in the frame, it's hard to isolate from the frame or from the wheel and tyre combination just exactly what's going on. My advice to anyone that's looking to buy one is go and test it, because I think you'll really enjoy some of the characteristics of the bike. And I think once you've ridden it a few hundred meters, you'll instantly fall in love with just how smooth, how enjoyable it is to ride. That's pretty much what happened to me last August when I went out and test rode the demo bike that Cyclist had in the shop, and It's just a lovely rideable race bike, and I don't think you'll ever be disappointed riding it. The full spec of the bike is in the description down below, but please, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I'll drop them in the comments below and I'll do my absolute best to get back to you. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you all again in another video soon.